Okay, we're going to get started then today. This is Western Civ 1 to 1500. Hey, come on in. Maybe you just grab a seat somewhere. Yeah, you can sit back there. That's fine. We're starting to run out of room. Okay, so this is Western Civ 1. And this one officially, I think, is Section 2. And then there's a Western Civ 1 Section 1. Crazy as that seems. This class is a little bit different for several reasons. First of all, I'm teaching it, so that makes it very different. Some people say. I don't think so, but they do. The other thing that makes it different is that this is a hybrid class. And I don't know if you've ever taken a hybrid class. Anybody here taken a hybrid class? No. Well, 1, 2, 3. Oh, wow. 4. Very experienced then. So a hybrid class is what? Somebody who took one, tell me. What is it? How's it different than a regular class? You come 1 day a week. More homework than classwork. I think all these things are true. Basically, you think of it, maybe you've taken an online class, and then you've taken a class in the classroom. This is kind of a mixture of the two. Okay? So that means that there will be things to do online, and we'll also be meeting here. We'll meet here basically every week. If there are weeks when we don't miss, and that's really more for the Tuesday class than the Thursday class, we miss some Tuesdays because of events like this week, there was no Tuesday. Next week, there will be Tuesday, as classes. In a few weeks, we have SEU conference. Yeah. We'll miss Tuesday that week, okay? And then there's going to be one Thursday I won't be here. For those times when I'm not here, which only is going to affect this class once, I'm going to record. That's what I'm doing right now. I'm recording what I'm saying on my computer, and then I'm going to upload it as a file onto the MyFire, okay? And that way we can all see it anytime you want. I'm not going to do that for every class, at least not. We'll see how it goes. But we'll do it for the ones that I will miss. So, for example, today I'm recording it for the Tuesday class because the Tuesday class didn't meet this week. They can watch it on MyFire. Well, here is the MyFire, and there'll be a lot more stuff coming up here. Basically, you'll want to go back and check this. This will be very important for our course. I have week 1 up. This is what we'll do every week. It tells you what you're supposed to do for the week. And by the way, that's this week. But what I've done this week, since it's a short week, is I've made the stuff that's due this week actually due a week from Sunday. Typically, everything's going to be due on Sunday night around midnight, 11:55 p.m. So this week, you can think of it that you've got to do 2 assignments by next Sunday, when normally you only have to do 1. You can go ahead and do it any time you want. It's up there. So there's a video assignment. There'll be one of those every week. There are terms that are out of your textbook, 20 terms to do. And then some weeks there'll be a quiz. And of course some weeks there'll be a test. So you just need to check this often. Yeah, come on in and sit over this way if you would. Thanks. We're just going over the class. You're for Western Civ? Yes. Okay. So this is where you will find that on MyFire. Okay. What else do I need to tell you? I don't know. I guess that's it. Anybody have any questions about how this kind of a course will work? So we will communicate via email, and of course I should see you every week or almost every week. Yes.
I've never taken section 1 before.
Yeah. Section 1, no, Western Civ. There's Western Civ 1 and Western Civ 2, which you can take in any order. And Section 1 just means it's this same course, only it's meeting on Tuesdays only. And Section 2 meets on Thursday only. Okay? So you can find, your syllabus will be up there on MyFire. There will be a form, it's called Consent to Comply form, that you just print that out and sign it and give it to me next week. It just simply says that you're going to, I don't know what it says. It says you're going to read your textbook, and it says you know that your stuff might be turned in to a thing called Turnitin, which scans it and looks at it for plagiarism, stuff like that. It's just basically a little legal form that they want everybody to fill out. So print that out somewhere and bring it with you next class period. It's very simple. You just write your name in it, you sign it, and I think that's it. It's a one-page thing. Any other questions? So this is a hybrid course. So quite a bit of it will be online, and then about half will be here. So all your tests will be done online. All your quizzes will be done online. You'll turn in all your assignments online. So what do we do while we're here? Mainly, I talk to you. I do lectures, and I answer questions, and then we have some discussion. That's what we're doing, and then the rest of it you can do anytime the rest of the week you want to do it. The idea here is that we need to have as much time online as you would have in the classroom. Does that make sense? So in other words, since we're only meeting on this class on Thursdays, that's an hour and 15 minutes. There has to be, well, there's supposed to be, and I'm trying to make sure there will be, an hour, at least an hour and 15 minutes of stuff for you to do the rest of the week that sort of makes up for the fact that we don't meet. I think it's going to work out. If it's new to you, I think within a couple of weeks you'll be all right. If you have any questions, you can let me know. I have office hours and stuff. It's all on the syllabus, which will be on MyFire. My phone number and all that kind of stuff. Email is a good way to get in touch with me. I check it quite often, and I try to respond. Sometimes I had a class that met at 8 in the morning, and I went into the 8 in the morning class, and a guy came up to me and said, "Did you get my email? You never answered my email." And I said, "Well, I'm sorry, and so then I went and checked it after class. He sent it at 3:30 in the morning, before the 8 a.m. class. So I may not answer it that fast, okay? If you send it to me at 3 in the morning, you may not get an answer, at 3:30 in the morning from me directly, because I usually am not up at 3, certainly not checking my email. Okay, so, but I'll try to respond to, let's say, within 24 hours. How's that? That'll be my goal, to respond within 24 hours. So the textbook we're using is Spielvogel. Hopefully you've been able to get it. I've recommended the 8th edition. Okay, that's in the bookstore. You will need the book, because a lot of stuff we're going to do, especially since we're only meeting once a week, it's going to be reading a textbook, doing terms, and that sort of thing. So sometimes I find students who say, well, do we really need the book? Yes. I would say normally, yes, in any of my classes, you're going to need the book. Otherwise, I wouldn't assign it. Okay? The other thing that's listed there, and somebody asked me a question about that, and then we'll get started, is there is a text that's online. It's called The Life of Charlemagne. And if you look at your syllabus, you can just click on it, and it'll take you there. You don't need to buy it, although they are selling copies of it in the bookstore. So if you'd rather read it in print form, then you could get, it's not very much. I think it's like $7 or $8 over there. Or you can read it online. You just have to scroll through it. Sometimes people don't like that. I guess you could try to print it all yourself and read it that way, which would probably cost you more than buying it. Okay? Any questions about that? All right, well, let's go ahead and get started then. We really have today, this semester, probably, I tell people, probably about 5,000 years of history to cover. Okay, about 5,000 years of history to cover. Yeah, you'll definitely want to sit where you can see this screen, because about everything we do will be on the big silver screen here. So be sure you can see it comfortably, okay? All right. So we're going to start with the very beginnings of civilization, which starts in Mesopotamia, and we're going to work all the way up to about, let's say, about 1600 AD. So, start back at least 3000 BC, then 4,600, almost 5,000 years of history in 15 weeks, roughly. Okay, so that's a big task. So obviously we're going to have to skip some things. But where does history begin? Where does it all begin? It begins here in Mesopotamia. Where is Mesopotamia? Mesopotamia is basically in what today would be modern-day Iraq. Modern-day Iraq, Middle East. Mesopotamia comes from two Greek words. Mesos, which means the middle, and Potamos, which means the river. Maybe you've heard of a hippopotamus, right? You've all heard of a hippopotamus. Hippopotamus in Greek literally means, hippus means horse, potamos means river, a river horse, a hippopotamus. This is sometimes called the Fertile Crescent. You can see that sort of white boomerang shape up there. That's the Fertile Crescent. And sometimes it takes a little different direction, but it basically covers Mesopotamia and down the coast. We cover Israel and Lebanon. Some people extend it on down to cover Egypt as well. But typically, the coast of what today would be Israel, Lebanon, and then turning and coming down between the two rivers. Because there's a lot of desert in between there. So we might also call it the modern Middle East. Or certainly it's a part of the modern Middle East. All right? So this is Mesopotamia. So that's where we begin. Why do we begin there? Because as one author wrote, his name was Samuel Noah Kramer, history begins at Sumer. He wrote a little book, supposed to be a popular book, where he took the cuneiform tablets and he translated them and gave people stories of everyday life. And without writing, we can learn some of the history, but with writing, of course, we know a lot more. And so Samuel Noah Kramer wrote this. He actually tells one story in there that I will share with you. It's called the first case of apple polishing. And you know what apple polishing is? People used to give teachers apples. Well, if anybody's ever given me an apple. Well, I don't know, maybe. But anyway, you take the apple and polish it and put it up on the desk, and then you walk and sit down in your seat, and then, oh, well, thank you for the apple, that sort of thing. This is a story all the way back in Sumer. So over 4,000 years ago, a boy comes home, tells his father, I'm not doing well at school. Dad, I don't know what I'm going to do. And father listens to it. He says, okay, here's what we're going to do. You're going to invite your teacher here to our house for dinner. And, we're going to give him a really nice dinner. We're going to get to know him. And then you're going to do better in school. Basically, I'm giving you the summary, right? You can read it for yourself. I'm sure our library has a copy. History begins at Sumer. And so you call that the first case of apple polishing. So we see that people, even though they're 5,000 years ago, we can recognize a lot of what's going on there. How do we know that? Because of the writing. So here's a better map that shows overlaid. Overlaid, you can see Mari, Babylon, Ur, right? And then you see the modern countries, Iraq, Syria, Turkey, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, okay? So that's the area we're talking about, primarily down there. A lot of it's down in that southern part around Ur. There was a famous person from Ur. Anybody know who? Anybody heard of somebody from Ur? Somebody might have heard of. Ur? Ur? He's in the Bible, yeah. Abraham, exactly. Abraham is from Ur. Now, there's some question in some people's mind as to which Ur it was, but a lot of people think it's this Ur right here. So Abraham came from Mesopotamia. Okay, he was a Mesopotamian. He's from Ur. And then he says, of course we know he travels. He migrates to Palestine, to Israel, okay, and on to Egypt and so forth. Is that your hand up? Yeah, go ahead.
I have a question for Babylon.
Babylon, sure. Babylon is not a country. Babylon was a city-state. Today there is still a site of Babylon. Babylon's very close to Baghdad. But they're not the same. There are ruins there still today, if somebody hasn't bulldozed them yet. But yes, they're still there. That's the unfortunate thing that's happening in a lot of these ancient sites, is that they're being destroyed. I mean, on purpose. They're being blown up and bulldozed and stuff like that. But yes, Babylon Now there was an empire, the Babylonian Empire, okay, but the city of Babylon, the ruins of it are still there. At least I hope they're still there. Somebody didn't destroy it up there. But it's not far from Baghdad. All right. So let's talk a little bit about that geography. We're saying the land between the rivers, right? Mesopotamia. So what are the rivers? Well, you've probably heard of the rivers. The Tigris and the Euphrates, all right? So which one is which? Well, the Tigris is further east. Okay, Euphrates. Euphrates is actually a longer river, and it flows more slowly, and the Tigris is quicker and flows down in. Anyway, you can see them there on the map, Tigris and Euphrates River. All right? Now the other thing we need to remember, of course you can see up there where Mount Ararat is located, right? That's up in Turkey. Okay, so I've been to Mount, well, I didn't climb Mount Ararat. I've been to the bottom. How's that? The bottom of Mount Ararat. Very imposing mountain with snow on it, even in the summertime. Yes.
And that's where we are.
Yes, I mean this is there's some question: is this the Mount Ararat of the Old Testament? Many people believe the Ark is up there, on top, and so there have people tried to go look for it. They haven't really found it, I don't think. There was an interesting show they had on television many years ago about a guy, and he had a camera, like a video camera, and he said he found the ark, and they had showed some wood there, and they showed the guy was backing up to get it in view, and he fell over the edge of the mountain, as I remember it. So I don't. Anyway, things like that have happened. So you want to really investigate it carefully, I guess I would say. But yes, this is the name, and it is a huge mountain there, and you can see that the rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates, both begin in what today would be Turkey, eastern Turkey, and they flow down through Syria and Iraq. Okay? On down to the Persian Gulf. Well, these are unpredictable. One thing about this is there's unpredictable floods that are here. So we need to keep that in mind. Now, when we talk about Egypt, and we'll see how much time we have in class to talk about Egypt, but I'll mention it here. The Nile floods, but it floods very regularly, whereas the Tigris and Euphrates flood irregularly, unpredictably. And so that means it could wash out your crops, and sometimes pretty violently. And I don't know if you know anything about farming, maybe not, but most things don't grow well underwater, right? Except for something like rice. You start it underwater, but about everything else, if it gets too wet, it rots. It won't grow. So if you go out and plant all your fields, there's a big flood. Chances are your seed is all going to rot, or the plants will all die. And then you're going to have to try to plant again if you have enough seed to do it. And think of all the work and all the effort. So, it can make a lot of difference, plus just people's houses and everything else. I don't know if you've ever been in a flood. I hope not. But it's a terrible thing, and it leaves behind a lot of silt and a lot of trouble for people. Well, what about the climate here in this part of the world, Mesopotamia? It can be very hot. Of course, it gets pretty hot down here in Florida, right? This time of year, I haven't been to Florida very long. I just moved here last summer. I got here in August and had to unload the truck and do all that. 97 degrees or 97% humidity. That was a lot of fun, unloading the truck and doing all that. But, here it gets even hotter. It can get up to 130 degrees. Now, probably not quite as humid as it is here in Florida, but still can get kind of humid. And over 100 to 130 degrees is not unheard of in the summertime in Iraq or Mesopotamia. So think about that. Very hot. No rain in the summer. I go over and dig. I do archaeology. In fact, if you are interested in doing archaeology, I don't know you well, but if you're interested, I'm going this summer. And you could go along on the dig that I'm going on. I've been opened. It's been open to me to invite students to come. Now, I'll tell you, it's a lot of hard work. You can do it for 2 weeks, or you can do it for 4 weeks. And you could get college credit for it as well. I don't know what your majors are, what you're studying, but you could get credit, probably history credit, maybe anthropology credit, I don't know. I'm sure we can work something out, maybe Bible credit. It's in Israel. Yeah, it's in the northern part of Israel. Yeah. So up around Jezreel Valley, up around the Sea of Galilee, that would be the area. And there will be some travel, and be a few days off, go to Jerusalem and go to a few other sites. Okay? But a lot of work too. Anyway, if you're interested, think about it, let me know. It'll be in late May and June. I can get you this. I don't have the specific dates yet. But if you're interested, let me know. We can work it out. Now, the other thing in Mesopotamia, if you take a look at this picture, which is kind of hard to see down at the bottom, there aren't many trees. You can see in that picture one tree, right? There aren't many trees. They just don't grow in Mesopotamia. And what trees do grow, you don't want to cut them down because there are things like olive trees and date palms, stuff like that, things that you get food from, and they're not really that good for building with anyway, right? Olive trees are pretty bent and everything, so it's not that good for making lumber. So consequently, like here in the United States, we build a lot of things out of lumber in a lot of places. They didn't have lumber. What about stone? That's what they did in Egypt. They don't have a lot of stone either. What do they have? They got mud. They got mud. They got dirt and water. They mix it together and they make mud bricks. In fact, that's in this picture down here in the lower left. It's kind of hard to see, but those are mud bricks baking in the sun. And then up above, you can see mud bricks. Closer up, you can actually see cuneiform writing on a few of them. So they would make those by hand and let them bake in the sun. They would not bake them in an oven because, again, they don't have enough wood to do that, right? It takes a lot of wood to heat up an oven and to bake a whole bunch, enough bricks for a building. So they just didn't. They sun baked them, and then they would stack them up, and then they would usually coat the bricks. They would coat the wall with a kind of plaster. They would kind of mud mixed with plaster, kind of whitewash it or whatever you want to call it, sort of give it a little bit of waterproofing that way. And that's how they kept their walls. They would have to maintain their walls, keep them. Because again, it doesn't rain several months out of the year. So, how do you think, without wood, they cook their food? Always ask students this. What kind of fuel? Yeah. It doesn't get that hot. I mean, I suppose you fry an egg or something, right? But it could be hard to bake. Yeah, that's good, but it's a good idea. Yes, very good. She got it right there. You heard her? Manure. Manure. What's brown and sounds like a bell? Dung. 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 So that's what they used. Manure. I remember, I'll just tell you this. I don't have much time for stories, but here's a story. When I was a kid, I had a great uncle. He was my great aunt's husband. And he had made his own house out of 2 railroad cars. He took 2 railroad cars that were kind of the refrigerator ones, kind of insulated. He put them side by side. And then that was the house. Now, of course, he fixed it up. He put siding on it, and he put stuff on the inside. You go in the house, you wouldn't even know it. The way you know it is if you went underneath it. Underneath it, he dug out a kind of, not a basement, but like a cellar, right? And to heat it, he just had like a gas stove in there. And so he would go down underneath there when it was cold. This is up in Indiana. It gets pretty cold. He would build a fire in a potbelly stove. And it would heat up the cellar, and that would heat up the floor. Now, how did he start his fire? He had a few newspapers. Newspapers were things people used to read, by the way. You probably haven't seen too many of them lately. And he had a coal scuttle, not with coal, but what he called chips. And I remember one day he said, and then he'd get it going, and then he'd put some wood in there, or whatever he had. And he said, well, we need more chips. We're out of chips. So we took the thing, we went across the road, and we went into a big field with a bunch of black Angus cattle, a whole bunch of them. And he said, okay, take that one, take that one. That one's not ready yet. Take that one. And he had me pick up the chips. chips. Okay? They burn very well. They burn very well. So you'd crumple up some newspaper, put 2 or 3 of those chips in there, and you'd have a fire going, and he would throw some other stuff in, wood and stuff. You could have made a whole fire with chips. Of course, you have to be out there collecting a lot of them. That wasn't bad, as long as you get them when they're done, we call it, he'd say that one's not done yet. So anyway, so there were plenty of them out there because there were a lot of cattle. That's how they did their fires. They used dung, and they used it to bake. Ovens. They made a clay oven over the dome over it, and they would bake it. And they could bake bread in there. They could use it to cook, in a clay pot, cook stew or whatever, whatever like that. Okay, so that's it. That's my dung story. We have to move on. Sumerian city-states. Let's take a look at this. The first city-states that we see are called the Sumerian city-states. Sumerian city-states, 3000 to 2350 BC, important cities. Let me just list a few of them here. Ur, Uruk, Umma, and Lagash. We already mentioned Ur, remember? Home of Abraham. Uruk, there's a famous story that's set from the king of Uruk. Anybody know? It's in your textbook, an excerpt. Probably haven't read it yet. A guy named Gilgamesh. You ever heard of Gilgamesh? The Gilgamesh epic? Well, you ought to get familiar with the Gilgamesh epic. It's the earliest, really the earliest story we have. And it's about a sort of hero, a king. He starts off not too nice of a guy, and he has to do a fight against the guy. Anyway, we'll talk a little more about it. But he's from Uruk. And then Umma, you know her. She didn't like a guy named William. She wanted to kill William, kill Bill. You ever see that movie? Uma Thurman? Never heard of Uma Thurman. Oh, never mind. Lagash. Okay. So these are all city-states now. That means they rule the city and the territory around it. But these are all Sumerian people. That means they speak Sumerian language. And it's named for, we don't list it here, but the city of Sumer as well. Like we said, history begins at Sumer. So these are the earliest cities that really we know anywhere in the world. We're here in Mesopotamia, starting roughly around 3000 BC, and that's also when writing begins. Okay? So, Sumerians. All right, let's move on. Let's take a look at some of their architecture. One of the things we could see about ancient Mesopotamia and these cities, Sumer and others, is they had walled cities. Walled cities. What does it mean when you have a walled city? What do you think that means? Protected? Yeah, to put up a wall takes a lot of work and a lot of money, a lot of effort. In other words, if you're going to go out and make thousands of mud bricks and then stack them up into a wall to put around your city, people only put up walls for 2 reasons: to keep people out or to keep people in, right? You got a prison, you keep people in, you need a wall usually, some kind. Otherwise, people just wander away. Or if you want to keep people out, you put up a wall. So you have to feel that it's worth the effort, the expense to put up a wall. And in ancient Mesopotamia, they did. All of these cities have walls around them, every one of them, with gates. Now, the gates were the weakest part because that's where you go in and out, so you have to have an opening. You just have a solid wall here, pretty easy to defend, but see, down there at the end we got a door. Somebody could break in that door or that door. So those are vulnerable spots, but we need to have a way to get in and out of here, right? So these were made out of mud bricks. And they also made ziggurats. Ziggurats are temples, really. You see a drawing of it here, not a great drawing. Better than I could draw, but that doesn't say much. Ziggurats, then, as you can see, is sort of a platform on a platform on a platform with a staircase going up the front and one going up each side. What's it used for? Yeah, you got it. Yeah.
I was just wondering, so you said that all of these Sumerian cities had walls?
Sumerian cities had walls, yes.
And then the city of Ur, that's where Abraham.
Yes.
And then the king in that time, was it Nimrod or something like that?
Well, yeah, there is. Yeah, it depends. It depends. There was a king called Nimrod. Yes, yes, there was. You're right. And they were walled cities, And they have in them these structures, pretty unique structures called a ziggurat. Now, a ziggurat is not a pyramid. Some people get it confused. I don't know why. They don't have the same function. They don't really look the same to me. But you might think of the ziggurat as being a platform stacked on a platform and another platform stacked on that. There's usually about 4 platforms that are getting smaller in size, 4 rectangles going up with a staircase going up to the top. And what would they do there? They did religious ceremonies up on top of it. The idea was, we get up in the air higher, we're closer to the deities, right? So you're thinking of the Tower of Babel now, right? Yeah, I knew it. Yeah, well, this is exactly the same kind. The Tower of Babel, where they built it, they go up higher, get closer to God. Your prayers are closer, your offerings are closer. And they would sacrifice, animals and do prayers, and they had processions up and down there, okay? So the ziggurats are characteristic of this area. Now, the ziggurats were controlled by priests. So this is where we can start to see how society gets divided up. You got people who were priests and people who were not priests. Priests had a lot of power, had a lot of influence, had access to a lot of wealth, fancy clothes and all that kind of stuff, because they're priests. And they lived in nicer places than most people, and they didn't have to do, like go out and make mud bricks and take care of sheep and like other people are doing, right? So that's one level of society where priests, they're up at the top. Now here is a nice image that I shamelessly borrowed from National Geographic. Let's just leave it at that. For educational purposes only. Well, you can see here the artist, who I don't know who it is, but whoever drew this, I think did a pretty good job. They're drawing the ziggurat here, a much nicer view of it, and you can see the procession going up, and you see they're carrying the statue of the gods. And you can see here on the left, that's the king with that hipster beard thing going on there. And then his queens, maybe his daughter, princess, or whatever, they're royal, the royal family. So this reminds us that there's royal family, and so even these early civilizations, they had kings and a royal family, and they had priests, and then they had other people. And then we will read that they also had slaves. So we had at least 3 or 4 levels of society, depending on how you want to divide it up. Now, most of the priests were sort of related to the royal family. And then you sort of had the people that, sort of regular people that did most of the work. And then there were slaves here early on. Now, most of these slaves they did not do agricultural kind of work, as we tend to think slaves do. They did domestic work. They did, like they took care, especially for the royal family, that kind of stuff. Washed their clothes and cooked their food and all that kind of stuff. So, and notice how they hold their hands there. Sort of like one hand. I don't understand what. That, again, the artist gets that, the kind of hat he's wearing, the clothes they're wearing, the way they have their hands, all that's coming from statues of royalty from this period. So, nice details that are in that image. So the government then, we see that there are city-states ruled by kings. City-states ruled by kings. The kings got their power, at least they said they got their power, from the gods. So in other words, if you didn't like what was going on, don't complain to me. I'm the king. You might ask the question, well, why are you the king and I'm not the king? And I said, well, that's because the gods chose me. They didn't choose you. Sorry. It's just the way it is. Okay, so that was, this idea that the gods put people into power. Now that idea is going to continue on for a long time, all the way down to French absolutism, we'll talk about maybe when we get to the end of the course, what we call divine right monarchy, the idea that some people are born to a position and, unfortunately for almost all of us, we are not, right? You're never going to be the king or queen of England, neither am I, right? Because we weren't born in the right family. And so that's the same way here. Power from the gods and city-states ruled by kings. Agriculture, by the way, in all pre-modern society, over 90% of all people are dealing with agriculture, manual labor, taking care of animals, that kind of thing. It was very popular, 20 years ago or something, that a lot of celebrities would say they had past lives. I don't hear them saying that so much now. But they would say, oh, yeah, I was, like Napoleon, or I was Cleopatra, or whatever. They would pick very famous, powerful people. They say that's who they were in a past life, right? And so, despite what you think about any idea of past lives, I don't buy the whole thing. But let's say you did buy it. Statistically speaking, 90% of your past lives you should have been a peasant. I never heard one of them say, yeah, I just worked out in the field all day, planting wheat and taking care of sheep and stuff. Nobody says it because it's not interesting. Everybody was, like a king or a knight or some famous author or something. Anyway, so over 90% of people in pre-modern society were farmers. Now, how many people in here, their family is farmers? 1, 2, 3. Okay, 3, maybe 4 out of 15 or 20. Okay, so that's probably about right. Not that many people are involved in agriculture directly today, as they were back then, because you needed all those people involved in it, because to be involved in it meant that the rest of us could live. The priests aren't farming. The royal family's not farming. So there's about 8 to 10% of people are not involved in it. But everybody else pretty much had to be involved in it to keep everybody alive. All right? That's just because there was a lot of labor, and the yield wasn't that high. And that's just what had to happen. Now, remember I said a big part of the year, I go and excavate in the Middle East. And I can tell you that from May, certainly the end of May, to September, it just basically doesn't rain. I mean, I won't say it could never rain. It could rain briefly, but almost never. I've been over there many summers. I don't know how many summers, 15 summers or something like that. I've seen it rain 5 times, something like that. And of course, I'm always there, usually in May, June, July. May, June, July just does not. End of May. Now, early May it might rain some. Okay? So with that, what does that mean? It means you're going to need irrigation because the rain is very slight. And so they had to get extensive irrigation. They used canals, and they would irrigate. Now, when you irrigate, it's going to lead to something called salinization. Now, I don't know if any of you actually own a real glass, like a glass that's made out of glass. We call them glasses, but a lot of times they're plastic. If you get a glass that's clear, and go back to your room and put some lovely Lakeland water in there, fill it up about, halfway, 3/4 of the way, and set it on your windowsill so you can get some sun, what's going to happen? The water's going to evaporate. And when it evaporates, what's going to happen? There won't be any water left, but you know what will be left? Some stuff on the side of that glass. That's why I want it to be a clear glass so you can really see it. There will be stuff down on the bottom of that glass. Okay? I'm not sure. I haven't tried it. I haven't experimented here to do it, but there would probably be some white kind of like calcium. There might be some iron, some reddish stuff. Anyway, there'll be some stuff in that glass. Now, same kind of thing happens when you irrigate in a very dry and hot environment. A lot of it's going to evaporate, and that's going to leave behind the salts that are in the water. All water has minerals, but it also sometimes has salts. I don't mean just sodium chloride. Could be magnesium chloride and some other things like that. Different salts. And these salts then can build up in the soil. Okay? And if you put salt in the soil, I guarantee you your crops don't grow very well. In fact, they'll start to die. Some plants are very sensitive to it. This is why, for example, they end up growing barley sometimes rather than wheat, because barley is more resistive to salt. And a date palm is very resistive to salt. That's why you see them on, seashores and desert islands and stuff like that, because they can handle a lot of salt. So you don't want that, and part of the problem was that's what was happening. Now, what products did they have besides, say, wheat and barley? They had mostly, they had sheep and goats, so they had wool for their textiles. They could take the clay and they could make pottery, bowls, and that sort of thing, plates. And they did have some metal available to them. But can you imagine, most of their clothes were made out of wool. You can imagine wool underwear and it's 130 degrees. Well, just, things to think about. Stuff you probably don't want to do. Buy wool underwear and wear it in the summer. Stay around Lakeland. In August when it's 98 degrees. Anyway, that's what they were going to have to do because that's pretty, they did have a few other things. They could grow a little bit of linen and flax and stuff, but most of their stuff was wool. All right, let's go on. Society then was tripartite, right? Three big groups. Let's just keep it simple. There were three big groups. So we see a stratified society, even here the very earliest societies we can see. Not everybody was just sort of equal. There were different groups. So the first group we've already mentioned. The royalty, the priestly class, related to the king, somehow the royal family. Those are the nobility. Let's call them the nobles. The second class, or second group, would be the common people, commoners. We might call them peasants if you want to. These are farmers, merchants, and scribes. Some of them are trained. Someone like a scribe has to be highly trained, but still not royal. Going to have a different life than the farmer, but still that way. So, and then the third group that we've mentioned already, slaves. In this case, there's not a huge number percentage-wise of slaves, and the slaves mostly belong to and work for that noble class. So they're mostly, I guess, what we call domestic. They're working, taking care of the clothes, the food, the children, all that kind of stuff people don't want to do. Right? They don't want to. If they can get out of it, they'd like to. Oh boy, I wish somebody would come and wash all these dishes. I wish somebody would come and wash these clothes. I wish somebody would take care of these kids of mine. They're noisy. Take them in the other room and keep them entertained. Yes?
Did they have like maids as well?
Maid. Well, this is their equivalent of a maid. I mean, a maid is someone, you would just hire to do this. In this case, they didn't hire somebody to do it. They just had a slave that did it.
So
like a maid.
They
Yeah, slaves who are functioning like a maid, a domestic. Yeah, somebody's going to clean up and take care of things. A lot of their slaves are doing household things around the palace, mowing the grass, that kind of. Yeah.
A while back you said that it was ruled by kings.
Kings.
Was it like the royal family, like in that picture it had the queen or
Yeah.
Was some of the city-states ruled by queens too, or just only kings?
There were no queens that I know that ruled. This is a very patriarchal society. There were queens, and I'm sure they had a lot of influence, but I don't know of any record that says this is the queen of this city and she ruled for this many years. Usually the king is mentioned, and he has a queen. Sometimes he may have more than one queen. Okay? And then he has lots of children. So all of them are in the royal family. All right. And he might have brothers, uncles, that kind of thing too. Let's see where we are. Some later Mesopotamian cities. The Sumerians are there first, and then we have periodic invasions of people coming out of the mountains. There are mountains between what today would be Iraq and Iran. And sweeping out of those mountains down into the plains, there were people known as the Guti, G-U-T-I, Guti. The Guti people then were very independent and fierce warriors, as a lot of people who live in mountains are, right? Pretty independent. Sometimes can be a little violent. They don't want anybody mess. But, some things are hard to get up in the mountains, like grain and ladies. So when they would come down into the plain, they would take food and things like that. They would also kidnap, usually women, and take them back, I guess, to be their. I guess they didn't ask the women about it, but sort of be their new bride. Persuade her, win her over, I guess. All right. So that's the kind. These raids, then, of course, were feared and hated by the people in the plains. But this is the kind of thing that happened. Now, Sumerian people are not Semitic, but Akkadian people, the Akkadians who come in around 2340, they are Semitic. Now, what do I mean by that? Yes. Oh, I thought you had an answer. Go ahead.
Yeah, I do. And
From
from Shem.
Shem, yeah. I mean, what happens is in anthropology and history and other areas like that, we tend to divide people by their language. Okay? Now, of course, historically, if you look in Genesis, right, you had the Shem, the descendants of Shem, descendants of Ham, and all that kind of thing. Here I'm talking about a language group, Semitic. Semitic languages. Can you name any Semitic languages still used today? There are some. Two big ones. Semitic language. Anybody know? Don't want me to call on anybody. I don't usually call on people. It makes people nervous. Hebrew. Hebrew is a Semitic language. Arabic. Arabic is a Semitic language. Hebrew and Arabic are actually fairly similar. Don't tell them that, but it is. Okay? I mean, some of the words, like for example, the word for sun is shemesh in one language and shamash in the other language. Okay, and there's a lot of cognate words like that where it's just a vowel change, really. Anyway, so Semitic languages then would include the Akkadian language. But Sumerian is Indo-European, very different. Indo-European, so it's related to, say, like the Hindi language, Sanskrit language of India, as well as Latin and Greek and the European languages. So hence it's called Indo-European. Yes.
I have a question. I remember like when reading the Bible, Jesus was using a different language than
Aramaic.
yeah.
Aramaic is really kind of a dialect of Hebrew. Yeah, it's very similar to Hebrew, but the vowels are a little different. Some of the vocabulary is a little different. But it's very, very similar to Hebrew, and it was pretty common in his day. That is, in Jesus' day, to speak Aramaic. As a kind of dialect of Hebrew, I guess I would call it. Okay? Now, but it's also Semitic language. It's kind of a variation of Hebrew. Any other questions? Well, in Ur 3 then, so we go from the Sumerians to the invasions of the Guti to the Akkadians, and then we see a resurgence of the Sumerians in Ur 3 with the leader Ur-Nammu. And you know what the people said? Yes? Somebody's trying to break into the class?
I apologize.
Oh.
I'm still getting to know this building. I had no idea this class was here.
Well, we are.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I thought that door was locked, but I guess it isn't. Okay, I guess not. And you know what the people said? They said, Ur-Nammu, we love you. That's what they shouted. Probably they didn't, but anyway, it's a way to remember it. Ur-Nammu, all right? So he is the leader. Ur 3, why is it called Ur 3? Really, archaeologists named it that. As they were digging down, they had one level of Ur, second level of Ur, third level of Ur, and they found a big civilization, Ur 3, and so that's how it gets its name. Okay? In a nutshell, that's how it happened. All right, Amorites. Let's get up to the Amorites now. The most famous of the Amorites is Hammurabi. And his Hammurabi's Law Code, which is also, there's an excerpt of it in your textbook. 282 of very strict laws on this stone stele. I took this picture in Paris. It's at the Louvre. All right, you can see it there. And, unless somebody's bulldozed it since I've been there last, and I haven't heard about it, so I think it's still there. So you can go see it. A lot of people don't go over to that side. They all go see Mona Lisa. You have to go the other way down a different wing. And you can see a lot of neat stuff that relates to this class over there. And one of them is the Hammurabi Law Code. Hammurabi lives 1792 to 1750. He's a great warrior and a king of the Amorites. And he's famous for his law code. 282, I think what we would call strict laws. Let me put this into your mind, though. Which do you think is better for, let's say, a common person, like you and me, to have laws or to not have laws? Have laws? How come? Who said that? I don't know. You said that. Why is it better for us to have laws than not have laws? Sure. Imagine if I'm a very powerful guy, and here's a guy that next to me who's not, and he does something to me I don't like, I might just kill him. Or, do something real terrible to him. If there's a law, that actually limits how much I can do to this guy. So while these laws, and we're going to look at a few of them here quickly, seem very strict, I want you to realize that it's probably better to have even very strict laws than to have no laws, because it sets limits as to what can be done to most of us peasant people, right? So here's Hammurabi's law code. It's sometimes called the lex talionis, or the law of the talon, or the law of the claw. You have heard it said, an eye for an eye, and a tooth for a tooth, right? But I say unto you. Well, what is Jesus talking about here? Well, very directly in Hammurabi's law code, it's talking about an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. So many penalties then are physical penalties, corporal punishment. And there is a sense of fairness to it. Now think about this. It may not seem fair to you, but let's say I somehow did something that gouged out your eye. Then you have my eye gouged out. There is a fairness to that. You lost an eye, I lost an eye, now we're even. Right? You knocked out a tooth, I knocked out your tooth, you knocked out my tooth. It's even. Right? It's not, if I'm the rich guy and you're the poor guy and you cause my eye to get knocked out, I'm probably going to kill you. You see? That's not fair. That's not equal. So we might be cruel, but it's equal punishment. Now, there comes a time when, for example, the poor guy, there are some of these are monetaries. So let's say I'm a rich guy and I do something to you and you're poor. I mean, I cause your eye to be knocked out or do something else to you. Instead of knocking my eye out, I have the option of paying you money. A fine. We're used to that, right? As you're driving down the I-4 doing 150 miles an hour, you get to Orlando in time to see the fireworks. And you see those lights and they pull you over. You don't expect the cop to come and cut off your lead foot and tell you to slow down. No, you got to pay a big ticket, right? Monetary fine. Now, here's the thing. My mother used to have a little saying. She said, and I don't know if you ever heard this saying, you can't get blood out of a turnip. You ever heard that saying? Probably never heard that saying, right? No, nobody usually has. I heard it all my life. Can't get blood out of a turnip. What did my mother mean? Well, a turnip's kind of red, and if you sort of smash it some, it oozes out some kind of red stuff. It might look like a little bit like blood, but it's not blood. What my mother's saying is you can't get something from someone that they don't have. Right? So if you want me to pay you $10,000 fine, I don't have $10,000. You're not going to get it. Can't get blood out of a turnip. So what we're going to see in Hammurabi's law code is actually not a fair law code. The rich people pay fines, the poor people do a physical punishment. In part, why? Because the poor people couldn't pay the fines. They didn't have the money to pay the fines. And the rich people could. And in fact, if I'm a poor guy and I've lost my eye, well, I might get some satisfaction that the other guy had his eye knocked out, but I might rather have $10,000. I'm going to have, it's not going to, knocking that guy's eye out, it's not going to replace my eye, but I could use the money. See? So this is, as you go down and read some of it, you'll see that there is a kind of double standard. The rich pay fines and the poor do not. Now, when they pay these fines, and so you see these two distinct classes determine the penalty. There's at least two distinct classes in Hammurabi's law code, and the penalties of what they do. Not that it's wrong. If I knock out an eye, you knock out an eye, I'm rich and you're poor. It's wrong. But what we do to make up for it is different. I would pay a fine if I was rich, and you would do the physical penalty if you were poor, because you don't have the money to pay anyway. Right? So, but still, it's not uneven in that it's okay for me and I don't do anything. There is a penalty to me, and there's a penalty to you. It's just not the same penalty. Okay. All right, let's move on. Now, a lot of these payments, as you read them, you're going to see they mention shekels. Now, of course, if you are a student of the Old Testament, you will recognize shekels were used in the Old Testament. Now, I don't want you to think that shekels were coins. They were not coins. Shekels were not coins. Today in Israel, if you go to Israel, they'll have shekels, and they will be coins. In the ancient world, there were no coinage. There were no coinage until the 7th century BC. Okay, and this is long before that. They're invented in what today would be. But what is a shekel then? A shekel is just a piece of metal, usually silver, about a quarter of an ounce. And it's what you would put in somebody's hand at the end of the day. It's sort of like one day's pay. Shekel. You pay me one. And that's the way they got paid back then. None of this stuff wait until the end of the month or wait in 2 weeks. You did your work that day, you got paid that day. They put it in your hand and you walked away. That's your pay. That's expected. That you would be paid every day for the work that you did that day. And it very typically 1/4 of an ounce then would be a handful, a shekel, a handful, 1/4 ounce of silver. Now, they divided them into 60s because they used their units as 60s. 60 shekels equals 1 mina. 6 minas equals 1 talent. That's a numeral system, a numeric system based upon C's. That's not what we use today. We use it based upon, all right? Is there anything that we use today based on 60s? Time! Hopefully you can see the clock up there, right? 60 minutes, 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour. How about angles, directions, compass, right? 360 degrees in a circle, that kind of thing. All right? We get that from the Mesopotamians. It's a remnant of that. That's why we use it that way. We don't use the system. We use the 60 based on 60 system. So, we use that in directions. We use it in compasses. In that way. All right. Let's see what I got left here. All right. Hammurabi's laws then cover all kinds of things. I'll just put them all up here. There we go. And these are just general categories. And as you go down and take a look in your textbook, they have excerpts of the 282 laws. But they deal with performance of work. Let's say you didn't do your work. For example, there's one of the laws that said, and I don't know if contractors are like this today, but maybe people who buy houses might like it. If you built somebody's house or a building for them, and then that building falls down and kills somebody in it, right? Collapses. You know what happens? They kill the builder. And they bury him under the rubble of the wall that fell. See, again, a kind of fairness, right? You caused somebody to die by your shoddy work, and now you die and you're put in your shoddy work. That's one of the laws, all right? One of the 282 laws. Crime, of course, stealing, that kind of thing, of various ways. There are laws imposed against that. Laws dealing with land. How do you know who owns land? How do you transfer the ownership of this piece of land to someone else? That's covered. Commerce, business, a lot of business laws having to deal with fairness. For example, when you leave here, so you have a car or something, you go to a gas station, you get 5 gallons of gas. How do you know you're getting 5 gallons of gas? The little pump says you're getting 5 gallons of gas, but do you measure it? No, you don't measure it. You're just trusting it. Theoretically, somebody comes around and tests it every so often, and they put a little sticker on there or something that says this is giving you actually a gallon of gas. Now just imagine that, when gas was $4 a gallon, if you could just trim off a couple ounces per gallon, you can make a lot of money, right? This is the idea here. If things were weighted, they were weighed in a balance beam. So they have a little pan here, a little pan here, And so you'd put a weight over here, and then you put whatever you're buying over here. And when it equals out, then that's what you have. Like 10 ounces, 10 grams, whatever. Now, what some people did is they altered the weights. So it looked like you were getting 10 grams or 10 ounces or whatever. But really they drilled out the inside of it, and you were only getting 8 or 6 or 7. I used to work when I was in college. I worked in a grocery store, and I worked in a meat department back where you had to actually weigh stuff out and wrap it up for people. Yes, they don't do much of that anymore. But we used to have to put it up on a scale and weigh it. Somebody say, give me a pound of hamburger, and you put it up there, and then, we used to say some butchers would weigh their thumb. When they put it up here on the scale, they just kind of leave their thumb there and press down a little bit. So make it look like you're getting a pound, when really, they do it pretty fast, but up there, yeah, it's a pound. Got it? And you're really only getting, maybe 14 ounces. All right. Weighing your thumb. There were laws against that kind of thing in commerce. Marriage. Can't imagine there would be any conflict in marriage or need for laws. Anyway, they had them. And families, children, inheritance, all that kind of stuff. It covers it all. 282 laws. It covers all kinds of things. And we don't have time to go through them all. You can read some examples in your textbook. All right. Polytheists. The Mesopotamians were polytheists, as were the Egyptians, as were all these ancient people. That means they worship many gods. Poly means many. Theos means God, many gods. I'll mention four major ones. There were some variations locally, but these types of gods were there. The god of the sky or the heavens, in this case Anu. The god of wind and storms, Enlil. The god of earth, the soil, water. This has to do with your crops growing and all that sort of thing. That is Enki. And then almost every one of these ancient societies that had multi-gods, polytheists, had a fertility goddess. In this case, Nin-Her-Saga. Fertility goddess. And it's always a goddess, by the way. Men, there are some things women can do that men can't do. And if you are uninformed about that, ask any one of these ladies, they will give you a list. But I am talking about one particular thing, and that is giving birth. Right? Men do not give birth, women do. So it's pretty easy then to say life is coming from the feminine. Life is coming from the female. And so these are female, feminine goddesses that are going to bring us fertility. Not only that they're going to bring us lots of children maybe, but they're also going to bring us lots of crops, lots of wheat, lots of good things. Bountiful crops, fruit, wheat, and life. Okay? So without that, well, we wouldn't have anything, would we? There you go. So just ask the ladies. I'm not going to get in the middle of that. Now, here's another thing. They also had a patron god or goddess of the city. So if you live, say, in Uruk, there would be a particular god or goddess that would be the patron god or goddess of Uruk that kind of knew your area. This is the idea. Yeah, okay, we got the gods of the wind and the water and all that. But what about us? They don't know what's going on here in Lakeland. So we have our own particular god or goddess of Lakeland. That would kind of watch over us here. Right? Another thing is divination. What is divination? That's trying to figure out the will of the gods. Fill out the will of the gods. Right? Because what you have to remember is for the Mesopotamians, and really for the Greeks and a lot of these polytheists, their gods were not like our God. In that our God, right, we read, is one, right? But our God is also the same. Right? Same yesterday, today, and forever. God is the same. All right? So that means that the way God dealt with things 1,000 years ago is the way He deals with them today, and the way He'll deal with them 500, 1,000 years from now. In other words, He's stable. He's the same. Their gods were not stable. They were more like us, people. We're not very stable. We change our minds. We're very fickle. We get in a bad mood. Right? Get in a bad mood. And, and sometimes we just like to see other people. If we're in a bad mood, we don't want to see anybody else in a good mood. Well, you're in a good mood. Well, let me change that. Right? That's what these gods would do. So in other words, what that means is maybe you go through what you did yesterday, you do the same thing today, but it might make the gods very upset. And you don't know if it's going to make them upset. Right? So how are we going to figure out what mood the gods are in? Or if they want us to do something or not? Divination. Now, one of the ways that they figure out to do this is through hypascopy. Scope, look at hepatic system. Anybody in biology, nursing, something like that? The hepatic system has to do with your liver. So they would look at livers. Typically sheep liver. Sometimes other livers, but mostly that. And the priests would actually, there are models that have been found of clay models of sheep livers that have writing on it in cuneiform writing that describes what they're looking for. Okay? They'd also look at oil on water, stuff like that. Other signs. That's a good thing we're not like that today. We're not that superstitious. We don't do that kind of thing today. Nobody today would ever read a horoscope or have somebody read their skull or look at their palms or I don't know, whatever else they do. Or how about, have you ever heard of a lady named Cleo? Miss Cleo? Used to be able, you could call Miss Cleo. You remember her? Call Miss Cleo. That's been a while. Somebody told me Miss Cleo got arrested. But I don't believe that because Miss Cleo would have known that the cops were coming.
She did get arrested.
And she would have left before the cops got there. Well, anyway, Miss Cleo. So we kind of have our own things, that we kind of do, too, right? Well, anyway, call Miss Cleo. I think Miss Cleo died, by the way. Yeah, I was sad to hear it. Yeah, it was very sad. Miss Cleo's gone. Probably. We can't ask her now. Now let's talk about ancient writing. It's very important ancient writing gets started here. So let's see what we can say about ancient writing. We got to move on a little bit because, I'm adjusting myself to only having you in class once a week. So I'm used to having you in class twice a week. And so I've got to figure out what I leave out and what I put in. Anyway, we're going to put the writing in because that's very important. Writing begins in Sumer around 3000 BC. And we've already mentioned it. Cuneiform writing is wedge-shaped writing. Now I want you to remember now that cuneiform is not a language. Sometimes I hear students or other people kind of use cuneiform like, oh yes, that they spoke cuneiform. Nobody spoke cuneiform, but you would write it. It'd be like saying that somebody spoke alphabet or alphabetic. We use an alphabet to write, and we use that same alphabet. We can write lots of different languages, right? With very little difference. You could write Spanish and English and German and Italian and, so on. You can write a lot of languages using pretty much the same alphabet and characters. Occasionally there's a few special, accents or something, but pretty much it's the same thing. You can look at it and kind of sound it out. Cuneiform is that. It's a style, it's a system of writing that's used to write several different languages, some of them very different than each other. And they would use a stylus, sort of like a pencil made out of wood or reed with a little triangular shape on the end, and they would press it into clay that's still moist. That's what you see up in that picture in the upper left-hand corner. And typically those tablets that are made out of clay are about the size it would fit in your hand, about the size of an iPhone, or maybe a little bit bigger for bigger ones, like the size of a 8.5 by 11 pad of paper. But they don't get much bigger than that. Why? Because it's just hard to handle, right? Hard for you to hold it and read it. So just think about that. It was very practical. They couldn't have made it any size they wanted. But typically from about 8.5 by 11 down to about the size, say, of an iPhone or something like that. That's how big these tablets were. Okay? And they would use reed on there. And they could write Sumerian, Akkadian, Hittite, all kinds of languages. Now, how did we ever figure out this? We figured it out using the Behistun inscription. Behistun inscription. The Behistun inscription is an inscription in a mountain pass in between Iraq and Iran. And it has cuneiform writing on it, and it has it in 3 different languages. And a guy named Rawlinson, who was a British officer, went out and copied the whole thing down, and eventually they figured out, because they knew Persian, and they kind of figured this is Persian, and then they went back and they actually deciphered Akkadian and using this. So we're not going to go through that whole process here. But that is the way, and typically that's the way you're going to decipher languages. You're going to have to find it in multiple forms. That's the way it was with Egyptian, using the Rosetta Stone, which has it in hieroglyphs, and it has it in Demotic, and it has it in Greek. So they could read the Greek, and it helped them figure out what the rest of it was, the Rosetta Stone. Now let me see where I am here. See what I need to do, what's going on here. Doesn't seem to want to move for me. There we go. I do want to talk about Gilgamesh. So let me bring that up. We mentioned him in passing, But these tablets have lots of things written on there. I think it'll eventually come up. Here we go. One thing I do want to mention is Gilgamesh, at least in passing. Gilgamesh epic is one of the oldest, well, one of the oldest stories in the world, right? And it's an epic. That means it's a long story centered around a person who takes kind of a journey. And certainly Gilgamesh did. And it's written in a poetic style. That is, it rhymes and has rhythm. So the story begins with Gilgamesh, who's the king of Uruk. And he's kind of a nasty guy. He's not very nice to people. And the gods, according to the story, the gods take note of this and they want to send somebody down to sort of punish him, straighten him out. So they send down a guy named Enkidu. So was sent to kill Gilgamesh, right? And but what happens is when these guys start to fight, they gain a respect for each other and they actually become friends in the story. You have to read the story. This is just the beginning of the story. And that makes the gods really mad. And then they send down a kind of monster. And that's what you see depicted here on the stone. You see Gilgamesh and Enkidu fighting the monster. And eventually they are able to defeat the monster. But in the process, the monster wounds Enkidu. And Enkidu was a mighty warrior like Gilgamesh. But then he dies. And so this really gets to Gilgamesh because he says, you know, Enkidu was as strong as I know he's as strong as I am. And now he's dead. This morning he was strong like me. Tonight he's dead. So this brings death, mortality, into the picture that Gilgamesh says, if Enkidu could die, that means I could die. And so he goes on a search for immortality. And then he hears about a person who is immortal. His name is Utnapishtim. You're also going to get a lot of good names to name your kids out of this class. Someday I hope you send me a picture of your little baby, Utnapishtim, or your son Gilgamesh, yeah. And Utnapishtim, by the way, is going to remind you, if you read his story, of somebody you know. He's sometimes called the Mesopotamian Noah. Utnapishtim built a boat. He survived a flood. And in the course of the flood, he got a hold of a plant that was growing at the bottom of the ocean, and he and his wife ate it. And then they were going to live forever. And so Gilgamesh asks him about it. He tells him that story. And then Gilgamesh tries to go get the plant. You'll have to read the story to see what happens, right? So, it has a flood story. I won't say it's the same flood. You can think about that, though. What do I have next? Well, that's just a tablet with the flood story on it. Tablet number 9 of Gilgamesh Epic is the one that's gotten a lot of attention. Now, the other thing that they did is they invented the wheel around 3000 BC. They also worked a lot in astronomy and geometry. And if you think about it, we have a 12-month calendar, right? Why not a 10-month calendar? We have a 12-month calendar because the cycle of the moon and the cycle of the sun can naturally be divided into 12 cycles. The moon, I know you guys go out and watch it, because I see people out here on campus late at night walking around. I know that they must be amateur astronomers. And they look up, and if you look at the moon, you'll notice the moon gets smaller, and then it gets bigger, and then it gets smaller, and it gets bigger. If you go through those cycles with the cycle of the sun, and if you watch the sun carefully to see where it rises on the horizon to where it goes back and rises on that horizon again, there are 12 lunar cycles in one solar cycle. So that's how we get to that. Now, let me say a couple more before we have to go. Let me make a couple of announcements here of a general nature. It'll come up here in a second. We still have two. I want to invite you, if you would like to come, and we're just getting to know each other, but a week from Friday, I'm inviting my students and other, I teach history students, and maybe some students I had in the past, to come to my house on Friday night, a week from Friday, so that's the 20th at 7 p.m. We'll have some food and kind of get to know each other. If you want to do that, let me know. Send me an email or something. I can send you directions. I won't take time to do that in here. I won't have a way to transport you, but you might be able to share rides. Another thing I wanted to tell you about, if you were at all interested, like I said, in excavating in Israel this summer, let me know. Also, I wanted to let you know we are getting started a history club. If you're at all interested in history, you don't have to be a history major. We're going to have a lot of activities, I hope, and a lot of things that we'll do going off campus and on campus. And we're also going to start an honorary society that's a history honorary. It's a nationally recognized history honorary society. And you don't have to be a history major. You have to take 12 hours of history, and you have to have a 3.0 grade point average. You can join this national honor society. Also, if you use Facebook, you could check out our SEU History Facebook page where you'll get more announcements. Any questions? So I guess this means I will see you next Thursday. Remember, there are things due. I'm not making it due this Sunday. It'll be due the next Sunday. You'll have 2 video assignments and 2 sets of terms. If you have any questions, send me an email, and I will try to respond as quickly as possible. Or you can come see me in person. All right. See you later.